What up, y'all? St. Pete. I'm going to be reading from Carl Jung's The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. This is really interesting stuff. Um, I think it has a lot to do with what's going on today in the collective sense. And I'm just going to read this real quick and, you can let it marinate. Okay. So, the unconscious is commonly regarded as a sort of encapsulated fragment of our most personal and intimate life. Something like what the Bible calls the heart and considers the source of all evil thoughts. In the chambers of the heart dwell the wicked blood spirits, swift anger, and sensual weakness. This is how the unconscious looks when seen from the conscious side, but consciousness appears to be essentially an affair of the cerebral, which sees everything separately and in isolation, and therefore sees the unconscious in this way too, regarding it outright as my unconscious. Hence, it is generally believed that anyone who descends into the unconscious gets into a suffocating atmosphere of egocentric subjectivity, and in this blind alley is exposed to the attack of all the ferocious beasts which the caverns of the psychic underworld are supposed to harbor. And this is where a lot of H.P. Lovecraft works, is dealing with this unconscious, the lurker at the threshold from the conscious mind to the unconscious mind. This is that unconscious mind. If you watch the newest Stranger Things is just all about the subconscious, dealing with that, what they call Da'ath or the primordial. I mean, that show was just like that was one of the best shows that I've seen in a long time. I mean, it just goes deep. It's all about dealing with traumas, shadows. Stranger Things, the latest season was amazing. I watched it twice, and it was incredible. But it's dealing with shadows, trauma, going into the subconscious. As you see, she goes into the subconscious, and then uses the love to get out of it. The music plays a part in it, as you see in the show. How the music is actually the savior. Amazing, amazing show. But yeah. So, so, so yeah, they say that's where the ferocious beasts, which the caverns of the psyche underworld are supposed to harbor, and that's where the magicians that try to traverse into that pure knowledge, if they have their impurities burn on them, and as you'll see in the character who becomes the evil one, his impurities burned on him, and he was basically died insane, and it's the whole magical process. You know what I'm saying? Like being played out in Stranger Things. So. So true, whoever looks into the mirror of the water will see first of all his own face. Whoever goes to himself risks a confrontation with himself. The mirror does not flatter, it faithfully shows whatever looks into it, namely the face we never show to the world because we cover it with the persona, the mask of the actor. But the mirror lies behind the mask and shows the true face. As in humanity would rather fucking let off nuclear arms before we interlock arms. Before we look at ourselves and, look into ourselves and look at who we are and our shadows, we'd rather blow each other up. So yeah, it's real. It's real. The ego not wanting to face these shadows. This confrontation is the first test of courage on the inner way. This is the hero's journey. The first test. The first test of on the hero's journey is the courage, to look at oneself. A test sufficient to frighten off most people, and it does. Most people do not want to look into themselves. I hear it all the time. People, have Freudian slips all the time, talking about, man, I had some time to myself, and I started, I was like, man, I can't even. I've heard people say it, like they had some time to themselves to sort of, thinking about why they are do what they do, and it freaked them out so much that most people keep themselves distracted up until the point that they die, and they never want to look at themselves, and they're so trapped in their ego. Um, This confrontation is the first test of courage on the inner way, a test sufficient to frighten off most people, for the meeting with ourselves belongs to the more unpleasant things that can be avoided so long as we can project everything negative onto the environment. And that's what people do. They project all of their shit onto other people. That's all politics is projections. Is people projecting their fears, their traumas, their insecurities onto who they think is responsible, which they're wrong in politics all the time. If you play the political game, you're wrong projecting projecting onto the people who you think are the enemy. But yeah, so so for the meeting with ourselves belongs to the more unpleasant things that can be avoided so long as we can project everything negative onto the environment. But if we are able to see our own shadow and can bear knowing about it, then a small part of the problem has already been solved. We have at least brought up the personal unconscious. The shadow is a living part of the personality and therefore wants to live with it in some form. It cannot be argued out of existence or rationalized into harmlessness. This problem is exceedingly difficult because it not only challenges the whole man, but reminds him at the same time of his helplessness and ineffectuality. Strong natures, or should one rather call them weak, do not like to be reminded of this, but prefer to think of themselves as heroes who are beyond good and evil and to cut the Gordian knot instead of untying it, like Alexander the Great came along and just cut the Gordian knot, with his sword instead of untying it. But that's what people think. Oh, I could never do what Hitler did. I could never do none of that. I'm a good person. Yeah, you ain't looked deep enough into yourself, man. All of us have the potential to be that, and until we recognize that we all have that potential in us to be that evil, we are not going to know how to go about, you know, bringing this peace on earth and freedom that we always talk about. You know what I mean? Nevertheless, the account has to be settled sooner or later. Yeah, you got to learn this one way or another. You're going to have to come back to this life again. You're going to have to get this knowledge yourself one way or a motherfucking other. There really is no choice in the matter. You're going to, you're going to have to learn this one way or another. In the end, one has to admit that there are problems which one simply cannot solve on one's own resources. Such an admission has the advantage of being honest, truthful, and accord with reality, and this prepares the ground for a compensatory reaction from the collective unconscious. You are now more inclined to give heed to a helpful idea or intuition, or to notice thoughts which had not been allowed to voice themselves before. You know what I mean? Like, coming to grips with reality, that's how you can actually start to learn once you admit what it is that you don't know. That you don't know nothing, that we are spiritually in poverty and that we don't know everything. And you can, the teacher can appear in many different ways. You are now more inclined to give heed to a helpful idea or intuition, or to notice thoughts which had not been allowed to voice themselves before. Perhaps you will pay attention to the dreams that visit you at such moments, or will reflect on certain inner and outer occurrences that take place just at this time. If you have an attitude of this kind, then the helpful powers slumbering in the deeper strata of man's nature can come awake and intervene. For helplessness and weakness are the eternal experience and the eternal problem of mankind. To this problem, there is also an eternal answer. Otherwise, it would have been up with humanity long ago. When you have done everything that could possibly be done, the only thing that remains is what you still could do if only you knew it. But how much do we know of ourselves? Precious little. To judge by experience. Hence, there is still a great deal of room left for the unconscious. Prayer, as we know it, calls for a very similar attitude, therefore, has much the same effect. The necessary and needful reaction from the collective unconscious expresses itself in archetypally formed ideas. The meeting with oneself is at first the meeting with one's own shadow. The shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door whose painful constriction no one is spared who goes down to the deep well. But one must learn to know oneself in order to know who one is. For what comes after the door is, surprisingly enough, a boundless expanse full of unprecedented uncertainty, with apparently no inside and no outside, no above and no below, no here and no there, no mine and no thine, no good and no bad. It is a world of water, where all life floats in suspension, where the realm of the sympathetic system, the soul of everything living, begins, where I am indivisibly this and that, where I experience the other in myself, and the other than myself experiences me, the in lakesh alakan, to recognize the divinity in each person. If you can't recognize the divinity in each individual, you still ain't there yet. You know what I mean? You got to keep going. You still haven't gained that true knowledge of self, that you still see yourself as separate. You know, it's a sign of a diseased mind to see ourselves separate. You know what I mean? And us versus them is the sign of a diseased mind. Again, no, the collective unconscious is anything but an encapsulated personal system. It is sheer objectivity, as wide as the world and open to all the world. There I am the object of every subject, in complete reversal of my ordinary consciousness, where I am always the subject that has an object. There I am utterly one with the world, so much a part of it I forget all too easily who I really am. Lost in oneself is a good way of describing this state, but this self is the world, if only a consciousness could see it. That is why we must know who we are. The unconsciousness no sooner touches us than we are it. We become unconscious of ourselves. This is the age-old danger instinctively known and feared by primitive man, who himself stands so very close to this Palomora. His consciousness is still uncertain, wobbling on its feet. It is still childish, having just emerged from the primal waters. A wave of the unconscious may easily roll over it, and then he forgets who he was and does things that are strange to him. Hence, primitives are afraid of uncontrolled emotions, because consciousness breaks down under them and gives way to possession. All man's strivings have therefore been directed towards the consolidation of consciousness. This was the purpose of right and dogma. They were dams and walls to keep back the dangers of the unconscious, the pearls of the soul. Primitive rites consist accordingly in the exorcising of spirits, the lifting of spells, the averting of the evil omen, purification, and the production of sympathetic magic by helpful occurrences. And it is these barriers erected in primitive times that later became the foundations of the church. It is also these barriers that collapse when the symbols become weak with age. Then the waters rise and boundless catastrophes break over mankind. The religious leader of the Taoist Pueblo, known as Loco, once said to me, the Americans should stop meddling with our religion, for when it dies and we can no longer help the sun, our father, to cross the sky, the Americans and the whole world will learn something in 10 years' time, for then the sun won't rise anymore. In other words, night will fall and the light of consciousness is extinguished and the dark sea of the unconscious breaks in. And that's what I think. That's what I think a lot of what's going on with a lot of these people that are going crazy and doing crazy stuff is, you know, they are opening up this gate between the subconscious and the conscious mind. And if we don't go through the proper rites and the proper ways of, you know, dealing with that, that could be could be very, you know, catastrophic. So this is just a little something on the shadow. Just a little reading for the day. Any comments or questions, holla at your boy. Enjoy your day. St. Pete, I'm out. Peace.